Hello and welcome to Swiping Through History. Thank you for joining us here today. I am with the wonderful Mike Ingram. Thanks for being here with us, Mike.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, as always, as always. So today we are talking about the Second Battle of St Albans. And first of all, I think the first thing to ask Mike really is just to talk to us a little bit more about Warwick, because he is so key in this battle. He becomes known as the Kingmaker later on, though we often assume him to be some strategic mastermind in a way. But actually, at this battle, everything he does suggests otherwise.
Oh, yes, yeah, totally. He just never seems to be a good military commander. He wins at Northampton, of course.
Yeah.
And he's there later on at the Battle of Towton, which we'll be talking about in due course. However, there's a factor in with this that his uncle, Lord Falkenberg, is involved with all his victories.
There's like a secret VP mastermind behind him then. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, yes. And I think that it's Falkenberg. Falkenberg he's getting on a bit in years, but he's a wily old soldier. He's been fighting in the 100 Years' War in France. Mm-hmm. He's been a very successful military commander, so he knows his stuff. Whereas Warwick, let's face it, hadn't really been involved in any fighting. I think Warwick is more of a politician than he is a fighter. If Falkenberg had been there, would it have been different?
So first of all then, so we touch on this in the documentary, we talk about this in the documentary, but let's just go into a little bit more detail about it to start with. So Warwick basically splits his line into three sections, into his battle line into three sections along the road leading out of St Albans, and spreads them across a very long distance, 4.7 miles if we kind of were to use today's kind of maps and calculations for it. Well, for a medieval pitched battle at the time, that's a very long battle line, shall we say.
Yeah, and that's why I don't think that perhaps we've got it quite right.
Okay.
For much as anything else, you don't put your divisions that far apart. Not if you can drive a whole army. There's enough gap in between them to drive a whole army through.
Yeah.
The whole idea of being in divisions is they're mutually supportive. So if you've got them that far apart, they're not mutually supportive. So again, I think that we'll probably never know the truth, but I think there's something else going on here that we haven't actually got a grip of.
So when you say we here, do you mean us as in Swiping Through History, or do you mean the entire kind of historical community that researches this time period in this battle in particular?
The whole historical community.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that up because I don't want people thinking, oh, well, hold on, they're telling a story, but they've got it wrong. No, it's kind of an area where actually there's more research to be done and more little clues to be found in a way.
Yeah, I don't think, or will be very unlikely to find anything now.
Oh, okay.
That explains it, because you would have thought we would have found it by now. But it's one of those open-ended questions that we really just don't know. That bit of fine detail that will explain the battle, explain why they lost.
So effectively, we have Warwick, who is this genius of a politician, and just thinking about it right now in the way that you've just mentioned, it would also make sense why Warwick stays with the Yorkist contingent in London to start with, before the three battles that we've recently gone over with Wakefield, Mortimer's Cross, and now Second St Albans. Before they kind of take place and the Yorkists split up, it's not Warwick who's leading an army out to kind of put down a rebellion or face Margaret in the field, is it? They actually send Richard, Duke of York, to start with, up north to deal with Margaret in Wakefield, which doesn't go well. And then obviously it's Edward, the Earl of March, who is sent to the Welsh Marches to deal with Jasper Tudor. So it would kind of support your claim there that actually they know he isn't necessarily the strongest military commander, hence why his role in a way is to stay in London. when we get to looking at the armies themselves, we mentioned that Margaret, she has a French contingent with her,
Yeah.
and Warwick, on the other hand, has a Burgundian contingent with him. So
Yes.
let's talk a little bit about that. That feels like it's the European influence starting to creep into the Wars of the Roses here. Can you, obviously we know that you study that kind of European picture a lot. Can you give us a little bit more detail about that?
Okay, so what we've got is the French are with Margaret. This is the French king.
Mm-hmm.
We also know that the Dauphin of France, Louis, who eventually becomes the king, he's had this massive fallout with his father, really huge. And in actual fact, he ends up going to safety in Burgundy with his uncles. So he's doing everything he can to disrupt his father. Now, whether it's the Burgundians themselves who send the contingent, or whether it's actually the Dauphin who does it, we'll probably never know, or possibly never know. But so you've quite clearly got, and don't forget, Margaret of Anjou is French. She's of the royal blood, so she's got the support of the French kings. So it's sort of just possibly something just to annoy them. And it's quite possible that the Burgundians were there at Northampton as well, as we spoke about before.
Yeah.
So they might have been around for a little while. But you then got this big question of them. They also, there were talk about how the Yorkist defences seem to be very much organised by the Burgundians. So you've got the caltrops on the floor.
Yeah.
You've got the nets with nails in them, and so on and so forth. But as it seems, they're on the wrong side of the camp. They weren't expecting them to come from the other side.
So if anything, it cuts off their own retreat in a way.
Exactly, stops them escaping from the battlefield. And of course, it then brings you to the next question: what was the purpose of the camp? Because you wouldn't expect them. Is it just a rear guard? And this goes back to these questions of why are they so far apart, the Yorkist divisions? And I really just think that they were still arriving at the time.
Yeah, you mentioned this before a little bit earlier on when we were having a chat of this idea that, you know, Norfolk, he's got a large portion of the Yorkist force, and he's right up the head of the column in a way when you look at the military maps and the way they're drawn out. So in a way, you think that potentially Norfolk isn't even in position yet as such. He's kind of still on the move.
Yeah, and I think that's possibly what happens with Warwick as well.
Okay.
That's why he's not there in time. But of course, he's not going to admit that publicly. Right. And that's another issue that we have, that what is really going on, what is propaganda, and what is skin saving, basically. Because after the battle, they talk about Lord Lovelace, right. And Warwick quite clearly blames him for changing sides, and gives him as one of the main reasons why he lost the battle.
And does he change sides, or is this purely made up?
He was killed in the battle, so we're not going to know. So
in the aftermath of the battle, Margaret marches south to London, obviously now with the king in tow, and Mini Joffrey Baratheon at her side. And it's kind of like a nice little family reunion, but it doesn't go according to plan, because when they get to London, they're not allowed into London, are they?
No. And the gates are shut to them. There's a delegation of ladies come out to meet Margaret. Now, that's possibly just something to stall, because they're waiting for Edward to get back.
Right. So where is Edward at this point then? Just so we have the picture in our minds.
Yeah. Edward's returning back from Mortimer's Cross. Okay. So he's on his way back to London with the rest of the army. So perhaps it is just this delaying tactic. And again, this is another thing that ties back with the battle itself, is that was Edward actually originally supposed to be there in time, but the Lancastrian army moved much too fast to actually get there and cuts Edward off, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. So walk us through. So Margaret gets to London. She goes to enter London, and they shut the gates. They send this delegation of women out to talk to her. Why do the Londoners shut the gates exactly? Surely they see their queen and their king, and arguably, well, it's not the heir to the throne, because obviously Richard, Duke of York, was the heir to the throne through the Act of Accord. So, but surely it's their duty, in a way, to open the gates and welcome them into the city. That's surely a big move of defiance.
Yeah, it is. But don't forget that going back to July the year before, which isn't that long before, the Lancastrians had burnt half of London down. So they might have been a little tad annoyed with them.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, and they're clearly not for them. They're still pretty much anti-French.
Yeah.
At this time, again, the 100 Years' War's not been over very long, and you've got a French woman come barreling down. What do? You just shut the gates and keep them out. And again, at the same time, if you're waiting for the saviour Edward to come across from Wales, you've got it coming in that direction. We know as well, don't forget that Ludford was sacked not that long before.
And when Margaret's marching south as well, with her army before Second St Albans, she's allowing the French and the Scottish contingents to ransack and take what is owed to them on their march south as well. So it's really her reputation catching up with her then.
Exactly. And they just know, or they think, that London's going to share the same fate as everybody else.
Yeah, and so when does Edward then, at this point, lay claim to the throne of England himself? Does he do that before they march north to Towton?
He's declared king, but he's not crowned till after Towton.
Right. Okay.
So although he's nominally the, mind you, you've got two kings at this point, because you've still got Henry as well.
Yeah.
Running around the north of England. So this is where you start to get Warwick the Kingmaker thing coming from.
So basically, the conclusion we can come to today with the Second Battle of St Albans and with everything that happens afterwards is, realistically, it's all down to interpretation. Really, it's all down to what we think is the most likely course of events. Really.
Exactly. And again, back to that first thing that we first started talking about. Why on earth were they so far apart?
Yeah.
Because that just doesn't make military sense. When you've got an
especially
army
for the time, it's it's not like the First World War or Second World War, where battles did expand across miles and miles, especially as the battles moved as well, backwards and forwards. But this is a time in which a battle was very much fought on a field or in one location, and you could see from one end of the battlefield to the other. We're talking a few thousand men, often less people than you can fit into a football stadium. So yes, it gives you, that really does, coming back to the documentary, the episode we did release, that kind of, the idea of a football ground really does give you a sense of how much space is needed for one of these battles. Obviously, they often did take place in, across greater distances than that, but it does give you a good sense of actually how much space is needed. So then when you think about 4.7 miles, you realize actually how dramatically big that actually is for such a battle at the time, which makes us, understand how unusual it was.
Yeah, and again, if we just use, to finish up with that military analogy, if you potentially got 8,000 to 10,000 men barreling down from Scotland on you, you don't have yourself split into small contingents without having equal numbers, because you'll just get overwhelmed extremely quickly, which is exactly what happens at St Albans.
Well, there we go. I think that brings us to the end of our call today. A lot of great detail in there, a lot of thoughts to think about, and questions to be answered that you guys can answer for yourselves as much as me and Mike will answer for ourselves as well. So thank you very much for watching. This is going to be the last one in our Wars of the Roses series for a while over the winter months. We will be back in the spring. At the anniversary of the Battle of Towton, we will be releasing the documentary on the Battle of Towton. So keep your eyes peeled. It's the start of the next chapter, as it were. We come back with a bang, the biggest, well, no, not the biggest, the bloodiest battle to be fought on English soil. And there is a lot of controversy around that one as well. So stay tuned, keep an eye out for it, and we look forward to seeing you after Christmas and in the new year, when hopefully this COVID thing is on the way out. Stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Bye.